Hello everyone! We're finally here! I've reviewed 1941's The Wolfman. I've reviewed 1931's Dracula and its two sequels. I've reviewed 1931's Frankenstein and its four sequels up to 1942. Now it's finally time to talk about the four big monster mashup showdown extravaganzas of the 1940s. I've been waiting for this moment, can you tell? The first movie is 1943's Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, the fifth Frankenstein movie and the first Wolfman sequel, which starts with Lawrence Talbot breaking out of the family crypt when a couple grave robbers come to steal from his coffin. After escaping from a hospital, he goes looking for help from Dr. Ludwig von Frankenstein in Visaria, only to find that Frankenstein is dead. Larry transforms into a wolf and runs away from the angry mob, tumbling into the ruins of the mental hospital, where he finds the monster encased in ice and still alive. He befriends him, and together they seek help from one Dr. Mannering. This is really sweet in an unusual way, except when Larry turns into a wolf again, he and the monster become instant enemies. This movie is a ton of fun, which I think is why it's a favorite for many who have seen it. It has one of the best opening sequences in the whole series, with these two grave robbers bumbling through a spooky cemetery as a heavy wind blows leaves around and clouds drift across an ominous full moon. The sequence is so good, I even forgive the writers for changing the ending of the werewolf rhyme on me. Lon Chaney Jr. is back in top form as the Wolfman, and he's pitted against Bela Lugosi as the monster. This is an interesting casting choice given how things ended up in Ghost of Frankenstein between the monster, played by Chaney, and his friend Igor, played by Lugosi. Lugosi does a pretty good job as the monster. He isn't my favorite. That's not entirely his fault. The makeup for the monster in the 1940s kept getting more and more exaggerated, and I find it a little distracting. What I noticed with Lugosi is how his arms don't really bend, making his lurching movements even odder. I know the monster is crudely made and awkward in his own patched-together skin, but I would think he'd be a little more limber than this once he thaws out. There's also a strange hint of worldly wiseness about him, which, again, could have something to do with the ending of the previous movie. Returning with Larry Talbot from The Wolfman is Maliva the Gypsy Woman, played again by delightful character actress Maria Ouspenskaya. Her relationship with Larry is one of the highlights of this movie for me. Maliva is the only one who believes him and understands his pain, and she promises to look after him as her own son. Since it's because of her son that Larry is cursed in the first place, this is a bit like atonement, but Maliva seems to have a genuine concern and affection for Larry, and he for her. Also from the Wolfman's cast is Patrick Knowles, who there played Evelyn Anker's jealous fiancé. Here he plays an entirely different, more likable character, Dr. Mannering, a kind man and sympathetic listener who follows Larry all the way to Visaria out of concern for him. There's no trace of the mad scientist about Mannering at all. That is, until he gets a taste of Frankenstein fever. There must be something about the air in Visaria.
I can't destroy Frankenstein's creation. I've got to see it at its full power.
The sole remaining representative of the Frankenstein family here is Baroness Elsa Frankenstein, the only Frankenstein with a non-English accent, played by Ilona Massey. She has no scientific inclinations whatsoever, but she gets roped into the whole business anyway. In brief supporting roles are Lionel Atwill, in his third of 5 appearances in these films, here playing the mayor, and Dwight Fry, this time playing one of the concerned townsfolk, Rudy.
What animals are around here that can kill people?
Sadly, this is his final appearance in the franchise. Fry died only months after its release at the age of 44. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is not a perfect movie. Some of it, okay, a lot of it, is implausible, and there are a lot of outrageous things that happen, but, you know, that's par for the course with these movies from here on out. What it does have in its favor is that it's thoroughly entertaining, it's got good chills, good build-up and payoff, some scenes and performances I really enjoyed, and hey, it's cool to see what happens when these two monsters cross paths. So that's one successful Monster Mash movie in the books. Next up is 1944's House of Frankenstein. In this movie, Boris Karloff is back, and he's gone full mad scientist. He plays Dr. Neiman, a scientist imprisoned with his hunchbacked assistant Daniel for his outrageous experiments. He was run out of Visseria 15 years ago, and now he returns to get revenge and to perfect a brain transplant experiment. We're doing that again. Along the way, he stumbles across Dracula, played by John Carradine, the Monster, played by Glenn Strange, and the Wolfman, again played by Lon Chaney Jr. This movie's basically a collection of 4 or 5 different plot threads tied very loosely together. Karloff playing the mad scientist instead of the monster is an amusing reversal, and it's quite nice that Karloff finally gets to talk, since I think he had rather a pleasant voice, even when he was saying disturbing or threatening things, which he does a lot here because Dr. Neiman is probably the maddest mad scientist of the lot. His assistant Daniel, played by J. Carrol Naish, does most of his dirty work for him. There's actually kind of a Hunchback of Notre Dame subplot they've added in here, where Daniel sees a beautiful gypsy girl dancing and falls hopelessly in love with her. He rescues her, and though she's repulsed by his physical appearance, she's grateful for his kindness and is nice to him in return. J. Carrol Naish was quite impressive in this role. It's an athletic part, but he's also required to do a lot of acting with his eyes, and he was very effective. His sad puppy dog expression is compelling, and I think he might have had a chance at winning this girl, if Larry Talbot hadn't come along. Unfortunately for Daniel, she's very attracted to Larry, who is tragic and mysterious. She throws herself at him, and breaks poor Daniel's heart. Lon Chaney Jr. wins again in this movie, by the way. He's just so right for this Wolfman stuff, and the storyline with him, the gypsy girl, and the hunchback was probably the most cohesive and most engaging part of the movie for me. But hey, don't forget, Dracula's in this too, with John Carradine making his debut as the Count. Carradine himself is pretty good, combining hypnotic power and intimidation with aged dignity and old-world charm. His quick 20-minute plotline is kind of a tangent, with no great lasting effect on the story, but that's not Carradine's fault. I'm also not a fan of his costume, but again, not his fault. Glenn Strange also makes his debut as the Monster, but he doesn't get much opportunity to prove himself. Really, considering that the movie's called House of Frankenstein, it's kinda ridiculous how little the monster is in it, and when he is on screen, he barely does anything. He doesn't even growl anymore. Considering how awesome the monster was in the 1930s, this is disappointing. And these brain transplant plots, they get so complicated. I'm going to give you his brain, and he's going to get your brain, and he's going to get your body. Dr. Neiman's particular cerebral switcheroo seems especially absurd and poorly planned, but oh well, this is the guy who thought putting a human brain in a dog's body was smart, so clearly he doesn't care about bad ideas and consequences. One last complaint. I know I've been critical of some of these movies' endings in the past, but this one has got to be the weakest. It left me saying, "That's it?" Which isn't really something you want to feel as the credits roll. So that's House of Frankenstein. I guess there's only one proper way to follow that up, so the next year Universal came out with House of Dracula. This movie takes place at the hospital of one Dr. Edelman. Count Dracula, incognito as Baron Latos, and Larry Talbot both come to Edelman demanding medical cures to release them from their curses. Reluctantly, Edelman agrees, and in the process, the Frankenstein monster is rediscovered and thrown into the mix. I have a hard time remembering which house movie is which. They both have all 3 monsters, played by the same 3 actors. They both have hunchbacked assistants and a mad scientist, and they both have various plot lines tenuously held together by a common thread. Dracula is more relevant to the plot this time, which is good, considering the title, although the title really doesn't make sense since this is not Dracula's house. Anyway, I know fans like to argue about who did it better, Carradine or Lugosi. I prefer Lugosi, but their interpretations are completely different. I like Carradine well enough. He has a good, distinctive voice and imposing manner. What I don't like is his outfit, especially the hat. He looks like a magician. I also don't find the hypnotism of the nurse plot very interesting. For one thing, it's confusing. Does Dracula want to end his blood-sucking existence or not? Because I think if he did, he wouldn't also be in the process of making a new bride. Or is he just pretending to want a cure? What's the deal here? For another thing, I'm never invested in the nurse's fate. Whether she's under Dracula's power or not, she's the same dull, flat character, and frankly, I'm not really concerned about what happens to her. I am interested in what happens to Dr. Edelman's other assistant, Nina, played by Jane Addams. She has so much more personality. She's a compassionate character, the voice of conscience and reason, and clever, too. She probably would have been a perfectly fine leading lady in the movie if she wasn't stuck playing the supporting hunchback role. As for Dr. Edelman, played by Onslow Stevens, he has his own subplot to work through as he's lured to the dark side of science. It's actually kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing that happens with him. Hey, why not? We're throwing everything in at this point. As far as the other monsters go, Glenn Strange reappears as the monster, but has barely anything to do, again, and Lon Chaney Jr., now with a mustache, is back for the fourth time as the Wolfman. He's figured out that he needs to get himself locked up in a prison cell in order to not kill anyone during his episodes, so he can live a regular life for like 29 days a month, but that one night or two of murderous rampage taints the rest and makes any kind of pleasant, peaceful existence impossible, so he's still desperate to put an end to his agony. Needless to say, I feel much sorrier for Larry Talbot than I do for Baron Latos and his sketchy existential crisis. And I'd like to say here, thank goodness Chaney kept playing the role of Larry Talbot, because he is the most consistent thing in all these movies, and at this point, I need a little consistency. He's also consistently good at the part. There's never an occasion when I feel like, wow, Chaney must have been getting tired, he's really phoning it in here. Nope, 5 times doing the exact same thing, and doing a thoroughly entertaining and convincing job every time. I forgot to mention that Lionel Atwill is in both House films, playing 2 different inspectors. In House of Frankenstein, his role was lighter and quite charming. Here he's consumed with trying to keep the peace between the angry villagers and the medical people who may or may not be harboring monsters. This was one of his last roles. Atwill passed away in 1946. House of Dracula was essentially the end of the road for Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman, and it's probably just as well. The signs of franchise exhaustion were showing at this point, with recycled music, tired, overused plots, the same old village mob. Even the immortal, indestructible monsters themselves seemed to want it all to end, so Universal wisely laid them to rest. However, a few years later, in 1948, one movie came out that would bring these 3 titans of classic horror together for one last hurrah, one final monster mashup to send us off on a high note, and that movie was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein! Bud Abbott and Lou Costello star as Chick and Wilbur, 2 baggage handlers who get tangled up in the affairs of the Wolfman, played by Lon Chaney Jr., Dracula, played by Bela Lugosi, and Frankenstein's monster, played by Glenn Strange. I have a soft spot for this movie. It's a favorite from my childhood, often quoted and imitated in our house, and it was my first introduction to these monsters. I think it's a great testimony to its blend of comedy and horror that even while it made me laugh, it still scared me. The Wolfman's transformations terrified me. I often had to look away from the screen at those parts. I never wanted to watch the movie by myself, and I didn't even like to be in the same room as the box that the VHS tape came in because I was so afraid of the picture. Just to clarify, I'm not that scared anymore. Comedy duo Abbott and Costello of Who's on First fame are at the top of their game in what many consider to be their best movie. The main overarching theme is that Wilbur sees a monster, freaks out, and tries to tell Chick, but Chick saw nothing and doesn't believe him. This happens again and again, but it's carried out with a great mix of verbal humor and wisecracking and slapstick. The physical comedy looks effortless, Costello is particularly hilarious and winsome, and Abbott is a flawless straight man. Sometimes when there's a particularly good joke, I like to stare at Chaney or Lugosi or Strange to see if they crack or not. They don't. They are 100% straight-faced, in character the whole time. Just once, I thought I saw a muscle in Chaney's cheek twitch. Lawrence Talbot is hot on Dracula's trail, trying to stop him from accomplishing his evil plan, which involves recharging Frankenstein's monster, so yes, the three monster plots are finally connected. So Talbot's a good guy, except of course for when there's a full moon out, which is apparently 4 nights in a row? Yikes! And even in the daytime, be careful what you say to him. He's very sensitive.
In a half an hour, the moon will rise, and I'll turn into a wolf.
You and 20 million other guys.
Listen.
After 17 years, Bela Lugosi is back in the role of the Count, and he's still got it. It's so good to see him playing this part again. He's as smooth and as suave as ever, with a charming, amused expression that makes him incredibly likable in spite of the fact that he's, you know, the villain. He's got strong eyebrow game, too. Third time's the charm for Glenn Strange. This is his best performance as the monster. He's actually involved in the story. He moves around a lot, he talks. Well, all he says is "yes, master," and that's not much, but after Strange's completely silent stints in the last 2 movies, it's a big improvement. I just wish he'd open his eyes more. He looks like he's sleepwalking. We've got another brain transplant plot, but that's okay. It's a funny one, and fodder for a lot of good jokes. And we can't have a brain transplant without a twisted doctor, can we? That role is filled by Dr. Sandra Mornay, played by Lenore Aubert. Yes, the evil mad scientist is a beautiful woman this time. That's another unexpected factor that keeps this movie fresh and exciting. The movie gets off to a flying start, but things really ramp up in the second half. The costume party scene is a nice touch, with Dracula going as Dracula, talk about hiding in plain sight, and the bulk of the action takes place at this castle, which is a fun set, with lots of tricky doors and a creepy basement, and the climactic chase scene is awesome, with Dracula and the Wolfman fighting each other on one end, and Frankenstein's monster lunging around on the other, and Abbott and Costello running back and forth between the 3. From its fun animated opening credits to that delicious Vincent Price Invisible Man cameo at the end, this one's a winner. Funny and thrilling, the most satisfying monster mash of the era. And now I'm off to a monster mash of my own. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts on these movies, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye!